Namaste Sadavatsale Matrubhumi. On the occasion of Olympic wins, wishing you all a gold evening. I'm Madhvi Paranspe, an active volunteer of Disha Bharat. On behalf of Disha Bharat, I welcome our distinguished speaker for the day, Captain Alok Bansal, Disha Bharat family, and my dear Bharatiyas. Today, 8th August, is day 8 of our My Bharat nationwide online campaign that we are celebrating to commemorate 75th year of independence. Friends, Disha Bharat is an organization dedicated to the youth of our country. We sensitize our students to 5 different quotients: physical, emotional, intellectual, social, and spiritual quotients. We have unique and innovative ways to introduce and imbibe these 5 quotients to the students. We conduct yoga and desi games and games that are inspired by army trainings to improve physical quotient of the students. After playing these games, during reflection sessions, students are also made aware of the tough life of the army personnel. Team building and leadership skills are also practiced through these games. Our yoga sessions focuses on how our mind and body are connected. Some basic asanas and pranayams are also taught, keeping in mind the needs of the students. Emotional quotient is touched upon through counseling sessions. Intellectual and social quotient through quiz and audio-visual sessions. Last but not the least, spiritual quotient is initiated through lectures and real-life examples. Our approach of activity-based learnings followed by reflection sessions are very popular amongst our students. Their active participation and feedback continues to inspire us and make our programs more and more practical and effective for all our participating students. दोस्तों, कुछ नशा तिरंगों की आन का है, कुछ नशा मातृभूमि की शान का है, हम लहराएंगे हर जगह ये तिरंगा, नशा ये हिंदुस्तान की शान का है. On the occasion of the glorious golden movements, on the ongoing Olympic spirit, there is so much of pride and passion in the air that it must be a golden coincidence and spiritual blessings of Bharat Mata that we have a very distinguished speaker, Captain Alok Bansal, today with us. I now request Shri Radhakrishnan Hollaji, who is the trustee of Vishwa Samvada Kendra, Media Relations in charge of RSS Bengaluru and an IT profession, to introduce today's speaker to all of us. Vande Mataram. Over to you, Hollaji.
Sure, thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce Captain Alok Bansal ji today. He's the director of India Foundation, and he's also an adjunct professor at New Delhi Institute of Management, NDIM, and Secretary General of Asian Eurasian Human Rights Forum, AEHRF. He is a former naval officer. He served Indian Navy for almost 32 years, where he commanded 2 warships. So he was the executive director of National Maritime Foundation and South Asian Institute of Strategic Affairs, famously known as SAISA, and has worked with the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis and Center for Land Warfare Studies as well. So he has authored 2 books. One is Gilgit-Baltistan and its unending saga of human rights violation. The second one is Balochistan in turmoil, Pakistan at crossroads. So without much delay, I welcome Captain Alok Bansal and request him to deliver the lecture. Over to you, sir.
Namaskar. Thank you very much, Disha Bharat, for inviting me to speak on this subject, which is Jammu Kashmir, past, present, and future. What I understand is I have about 30 minutes to speak on the subject, so I'll try and stick to the 30 minutes timeline. We all know what has happened in Jammu and Kashmir. We just celebrated the 2nd anniversary of those cataclysmic changes which were brought about in Jammu and Kashmir after the region was enshackled for over 7 decades in certain obscurantist laws and provisions. We all know what happened after 5th August 2019, when the Jammu Kashmir state Article 370, most of it was sections were removed, and Article 35A thereafter became redundant. And subsequently, the state was reorganized into two union territories of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh. So what is happening today, I'll come to it later. What we should do, also I'll come to it later. But first thing what we need to know is what is the past of Jammu and Kashmir. And very often people ask me, why past? Why do we need to know past? Because we need to understand that in the international arena, Pakistan has launched a campaign whereby it has been trying to propagate that Jammu and Kashmir has never been a part of India. What they have been trying to say that it was artificially been amalgamated with India. And not only that, Pakistan goes even further to say that even the different parts of Jammu and Kashmir, like Gilgit-Baltistan, Ladakh, and different parts of the Kashmir, have never been together. And nothing could be farther from truth. Actually, this is absolutely a mythical statement which has been given. Now, coming to our narrative, and what we ought to know is that our epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana, both talk about Jammu and Kashmir. There were kings and princes, queens, princesses who have actually come from this area and interacted with the main actors of Mahabharata. A lot of them participated in the war of Mahabharata. But when we come to written account, unlike the rest of India, the Kashmiris have maintained a fair amount of historical account. You have Kalhans Raj Tarangani, which is considered the only historical account of the era that is bygone. And that, if you go into Kalhans Raj Tarangani, the historical narrative there starts with the King Gonand I, who was actually nothing but a relative of King Jarasandh, who was, as you know, killed by Lord Balbhadra, the brother of Lord Krishna. And it gives you the account of the entire Jammu and Kashmir, who all ruled over this particular territory for a long period of time. But if we come away from Raj Tarangani, because there have been certain aspersions caused on Raj Tarangani by certain people saying that part of its account is fictional, part of it is true. When we come to recorded history, which is the rest of India, you could say the recorded history of India primarily starts from Bimbisar's rule in Naga dynasty. The Mauryan Empire of Chandragupta Maurya actually ruled over this area. If you actually go across to Gilgit, which is actually the northernmost frontier, in fact, a very, very significant part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, the former state of Jammu and Kashmir, and now part of the Union Territory of Ladakh, the Gilgit city is identified by a rock carving of Lord Buddha, which is actually outside the city of Gilgit, called Kanka Buddha. That is actually the identity of Gilgit city. That statue was carved during the Mauryan period. So there is no doubt in anybody's mind as far as Gilgit is concerned, and that it was a part of the Mauryan Empire, which ruled it all the way from Patliputra, the present day Patna city, from where the rulers, not only Chandragupta Maurya, his son Bindusar and Ashoka and subsequent rulers of Maurya dynasty kept ruling over Gilgit. So there is no doubt that, in fact, the city of Srinagar is believed to have been created, established by King Ashoka. So it is Ashoka's creation. So this particular area was an integral part of the Indian landmass during the Mauryan Empire. Even subsequently, when you come down the era, you have the Kushan Empire, you have Kanishka, you had Huvishka, whose rulers ruled over this particular area. In fact, Kanishka had the 4th Buddhist conference in Kashmir Valley. In fact, the Mahayana Buddhism actually originated in Kashmir. And Kashmir has actually been at different times been the originator and a hub of activities as far as Buddhism and Hinduism, Shaivism is concerned. Advaita Shaivism actually originated here. And of course, before that, it was the seat of learning of Buddhism, where Mahayana Buddhism actually originated here. During Kanishka's time, the 4th Buddhist World Council was held here. Within the geographical frontiers of Jammu and Kashmir was the Sharda Peeth, which was considered as the highest seat of learning in the, not only in the Indian subcontinent, but in regions far and wide. If you actually read the account of Wen Sang, if you read the account of El Berenui, they all talk of the great significance of the Sharda Peeth. In fact, if you remember, Adi Shankara came all the way up to Sharda Peeth. And it is only after the clerics from Sharda Peeth or the teachers from Sharda Peeth acknowledged this, yes, he was the Jagat Guru. He was established and he was accepted as the Jagat Guru Adi Shankaracharya. So that much was the significance because this was considered the highest seat of learning at that point of time. And it was not only different exponents of Hinduism and various strands of Hinduism, but even Buddhism, Jainism, scholars from all these religions used to come and study there, teach there. And it was, as I said, a very, very big seat of learning which it existed. Of course, when we come to modern times and we come closer times, we find that as and when the central authority in India weakened, there were, of course, different principalities which emerged in Jammu and Kashmir, like in any other part of India. When the central authority eroded, small regions, small powers emanated in different parts of India. But whenever the central authority was strong, this particular area was part of the same consciousness, same political administration that rest of India was part of. In fact, there were a large number of rulers of Kashmir who not only occupied the entire Jammu and Kashmir as it existed before the reorganization, but went even beyond. The biggest emperor of Jammu and Kashmir was King Lalitaditya, whose empire extended all the way from Kyrgyzstan down to Ujjaini and even further south. In fact, if we go according to Raj Tarangini, he actually went up to the Bay of Bengal and other areas. So we have seen that, and his sons, etc., their rules continued. In fact, even when Muhammad bin Qasim and the Arabs came to Sindh, there is a very clear historical account of indication which shows that they did not advance further because there was a huge, powerful entity which existed north of Sindh at that point of time, whose rule extended across, and they did not want to antagonize them. So there was a strong ruler. But when we come closer to time, we see the Mughal emperors. The fact is, Akbar had captured Kashmir Valley. By the time Shah Jahan came to power, he had also captured Baltistan and Gilgit and all the parts of Jammu and Kashmir that existed before 5th August 2019. In fact, Jahangir was so fond of Jammu and Kashmir that he made that famous statement, if there is heaven on earth, it is here, it is here, it is here. In fact, Jahangir died when he was returning from Kashmir, and his intestines had to be buried in a place called Chingas in Jammu region, because Noor Jahan did not want anybody to know that Jahangir had died, because she didn't want that the throne be usurped before she reaches Lahore. Incidentally, and then of course what happened we all know. So Kashmir was an integral part of Jammu and Kashmir, Mughal Empire. But when the Mughal Empire weakened and Afghans attacked it, Nadir Shah captured Delhi, the Kashmir was annexed by Afghans. And then when the Afghan rule became extremely tyrannical, the citizens of Kashmir Valley actually appealed to Maharaja Ranjit Singh to provide them redressal and to provide them relief from the tyrannical Afghan rule. And that is when Maharaja Ranjit Singh himself led the army, which actually freed Jammu and Kashmir from the Afghan tyrannical rule. And thereafter, Kashmir Valley became part of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's domain. Maharaja Ranjit Singh appointed his vassal, Maharaja Gulab Singh, as the ruler of Jammu. And his General Zorawar Singh, actually not only consolidated the Jammu region, from Jammu region via Kishtwar, he actually went and annexed Ladakh, Kargil, and Baltistan. This entire landmass, which is now called Union Territory of Ladakh. Not only that, Zorawar Singh thereafter went and captured almost half of Tibet. He captured the entire Western Tibet. And it is fighting in Tibet that he died fighting jointly against the Tibetan and Chinese forces that he eventually succumbed. And then, of course, there were subsequent treaties that were actually created and which established the frontiers of Jammu and Kashmir and Tibet. These are the treaties which we have followed. And why I'm talking about these historical things is another reason, because we have seen what happened recently with Chinese. We had incursions, we had confrontation on the borders. But how many of us are aware about what our borders are? How many of us know that for over 600 years, there was a territory inside Tibet, which was an integral part of Ladakh and subsequently a part of Jammu and Kashmir? We had a village called Minsar, which was just near Kailash Mansarovar, which was a part of Ladakh government and subsequently a part of Jammu Kashmir government. And the revenues from this particular principality actually sustained the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, which used to go. So much so that this village inside Tibet remained an integral part of India even after Indian independence. The last official to have gone and visited this particular village was in 1950, who has sent his report. In fact, historically, there are so many accounts. If you go back into the British period, you have Johnson, who delineated this border between Kashmir and Tibet and China. He went and stayed there. Earlier also, the land records, the revenue that was collected, all those details are available as far as our records are concerned. But not many people know what happened to this particular territory. So the frontiers of Jammu and Kashmir were established during this particular period when Maharaja Gulab Singh started consolidating this. And of course, after Maharaja Ranjit Singh's death, the entire Jammu and Kashmir state actually came to him and he consolidated and created the modern boundaries of Jammu and Kashmir state. This is how it was. Then what happened? A lot of people say, what happened? Why did we not annex it? Let's be very clear, because Pakistan tries to create a narrative saying that people's aspirations were to be taken into account. We need to understand that as far as India's independence was concerned, at one state, the Congress party, which was then the party of independence, which was struggling for Indian independence, had at one stage said that when merging the princely states with India and Pakistan, the people's views must be taken into account. However, Muslim League had objected to it. Mr. Jinnah had said that that would amount to interference in the internal affairs of Jammu and Kashmir. And consequently, this proposal was dropped. So eventually, it was the sole prerogative of the ruler of the state to which country he wanted to join. And that's why when ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh, acceded to India, Jammu and Kashmir becomes constitutionally, legally an integral part of India. Pakistan, despite having signed a standstill agreement with Jammu and Kashmir, which meant that status quo ante will be maintained, started sending infiltrators, started cutting off the supplies to Jammu and Kashmir because unfortunately, before 1947, all supply lines to Jammu and Kashmir actually emanated from Pakistan. The Jammu region was supplied from Sialkot, from there, where there was a train link. The Kashmir Valley used to be supplied through Rawalpindi, coming from Uri, Muzaffarabad. The main road came from there. The road access from rest of India was not there. Actually, there was only a cart track from Jammu to Srinagar. So consequently, when Maharaja was pressurized, Maharaja was forced to sign the instrument of accession, and then Indian Army went and we actually pushed the raiders out. And thereafter, at that point of time, as you know, it was a newly independent state. Because there are a lot of questions which are often asked. Why didn't we push them all the way up to the international border? Why this POJK remained? And this I must clarify. Please understand, in 1947, Indian Army was also a nascent army. The leadership had actually undergone changes. There was a huge demobilization which had taken place after the Second World War. So there were huge shortages, there were deficiencies. So when Indian Army went into Jammu and Kashmir, the raiders were in flight. And they managed to defeat them decisively in a battle called Battle of Shaltang, near Kashmir Valley, near Srinagar, after which the raiders were in flight and the Indian Army was giving them a chase. and we went all the way up to Uri. And from there, we did not went beyond for a particular reason, because the garrison, which was actually going up to Uri, was asked to cross Hajipir Pass and relieve Punch city. As you would understand, those of you who are familiar with the geography of Jammu and Kashmir, that Punch is actually linked from Rajouri. Unfortunately, Indian Army, despite its best attempts, was not able to link up from Rajouri to Punch. And this was an era when large-scale massacres were taking place in those areas which were captured by raiders. In cities like Muzaffarabad, Mirpur, Kotli, Bhimbar, large number of non-Muslim population, Hindu, Sikh women were killed, raped, and all sorts of mayhem were going on. And it is at this point of time that in Punch, a small garrison under Brigadier Pritam Singh was holding on. They were surrounded on all directions from the raiders. And since the government of India at that point of time was more concerned about these civilians who were trapped, rather than going for Muzaffarabad or Mirpur, because their massacres had already taken place. So the troops that had reached Uri were asked to actually relieve Punch. And they went across Hajipir Pass, relieved Punch. And once Punch was secured, they again returned back to Uri and relaunched their offensive. Unfortunately, those of you who are familiar with the topography of Jammu and Kashmir would appreciate that across Uri you have high mountains. And once the enemy had dug in there, it was virtually impossible to push him out by the force levels that were available in Uri at that point of time. And that is one of the reasons why we could not do. There was a garrison which was holding on at Skardu, and we were hoping to link up with that garrison in Skardu, which is in Gilgit-Baltistan. Unfortunately, despite our repeated attempts, we could not link up with Skardu. And eventually that garrison, led by Colonel Sherjang Thapa, then Major Sherjang Thapa, was told to surrender because they had no wherewithal, no rations, nothing. And because they were also not only having troops, but they also had all the non-Muslim civilian population, which had actually taken shelter in the thing. Eventually, they surrendered on 14th August 1948. And the next day, Government of India accepted the ceasefire, which came into being again 4 months later, that is from 1st January 1949. The territories which remained under their control have remained with the foreign powers. So on 5th August 2019, we have done away with what had happened since then, because since then, Jammu and Kashmir's integration with the rest of India had remained incomplete because of certain provisions of Article 370 and 35A. So on that momentous day, we did away with that. We have reorganized the states. And biggest advantage of this reorganization has been that Ladakh has been freed from the bondage of Jammu and Kashmir. Because till now, Ladakh's development was hampered because it was part of Jammu and Kashmir, which was an insurgency-prone state. Now, the Union Territory of Ladakh has no such appendages. It can actually grow. It has enormous potential. It has enormous potential of tourism. It has enormous potential of hydropower. It has enormous potential of solar power, wind power, and so many industries can come up. It has actually a cold, dust-free environment, which could be ideal for servers of IT industries. Earlier, it was not linked with the grid, national grid. Now it's connected to the national grid. So actually speaking, there is a huge scope which was hampered because of being part of an insurgency-prone state. Now, other part which we need to understand is that after this, the social justice, the injustice to the women, because as you know, in Jammu and Kashmir, the daughters could barely inherit the property of their parents, but their children could not inherit that property. Whereas sons' children could have. There could not have been a bigger gender discrimination. There were certain people who were brought to Jammu and Kashmir, but their children could only get a watchman's service. There were certain people who were brought to Jammu and Kashmir, but their children could only be sweepers. Now, all this sort of social economic distortions were done away when this transformative movement came on. So now what should be the case? Now the two union territories are actually galloping ahead as far as development is concerned. Of course, there is a lot to be done future. I will come to that. But I think our next focus should be on integration. That is, people must go visit these places, meet the people, make the people of these areas feel at home. In fact, they should be taught about what's happening in the rest of India. This greater interaction is what is required. But even more important is our focus now needs to be on the territories which are under the adverse possession of Pakistan and China. We must endeavor to take them back. These are our integral territories. And how do we do that? Of course, there is a military angle to it, how we should do it militarily. But more importantly, in those areas where people are living, we ought to know about it. Because a country loses its territory, not when somebody else occupies it, but when it goes out of your mental space. When you forget about a territory, that territory is lost. As long as it remains in your mental space, you will regain it. It is something like Jews saying next year in Jerusalem. As long as Jews kept saying it, thousands of years they were away, but they managed to get back to Jerusalem and Israel. So what is important is that we Indian citizens ought to be aware about those territories which are under Pakistan's occupation and those are under Chinese occupation. The people, in fact, in Chinese occupied territory is virtually uninhabited, but the people who live under the territory which is under Pakistan's occupation are persecuted. They are quite unhappy with what's happening under Pakistani rule. Their culture, their languages are being suppressed. We ought to learn that. We ought to know about them. We ought to know what are the languages spoken there. What is the culture? They have a very, very rich pre-Islamic culture, which we need to know. Their languages need to be taught in India. We need to set up establishment by which these languages are taught. We need to propagate these programs, those cultures which are getting extinguished, like Shina culture. We could set up Shina Cultural Center. There are languages like Brushushki, which is a language isolate. As you know, those who are students of linguistics, the language isolates are those languages which have no other relative in the family. This is the only language of its own family. Now, these languages are slowly getting extinguished because the languages that are spoken in these parts, in Gilgit-Baltistan and other parts of POJK, are not spoken anywhere else in Pakistan or anywhere else. And Pakistan, under its fundamentalist zeal, is actually eroding the pre-Islamic culture of these areas. And these people have been asking that please do something about us. In fact, I remember in 2007 when we were doing a seminar and some of these scholars had come, one of them said that since we are your citizens, you should reserve seats for us in IIT IIMs because Pakistan is not going to do this for us. We have not done it, unfortunately. I think we need to reach out to the people from these areas. We should have radio programs, television programs specifically meant for the citizens of this. And as I said, similarly, we ought to know what is happening there, the news there, what is happening there, we ought to know. Just because Doordarshan started weather forecast for some of these areas does not make an adequate progress as far as amalgamation of these areas are concerned. As far as within Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, what needs to be done? Firstly, as far as Ladakh is concerned, Ladakh has been freed from the bondage of Jammu and Kashmir. And this region needs to gallop forward. It's a huge territory. As you know, it's a vast territory, extremely rich. It was the highest crossroads of the international trade in the olden days. In fact, if you go back to 17th and 18th century, there lakhs and lakhs worth of trade used to come to Leh. It was at the cross section of international trade routes. But today it has become an isolated corner of India. I think we need to go there. We need to visit there. Tourism is booming, but it needs to boom more. There is, of course, enormous scope for other industries. It can have numerous educational institutions. It's very cold. And there are a lot of other things that can be done. And what is even more required is that we need to, in Leh, IT-related industries, because you are based in Bangalore, it's important. Ladakh's environment, as I said, is totally dust-free. It's actually extremely cold. So you can have high-capacity servers there. You can have anything that related to IT. It's actually also got a very good solar power. So a lot of solar power can be installed, and there is no shortage of land there. So you have huge land mass, you can have solar power, you can have IT industries. We need to have industries, and I think every Indian must make it an endeavor to visit these parts at least once in 2-3 years, if not every year, so that people get to know you, you also get to know that particular region and know that. Coming to Jammu and Kashmir, we need to understand that in Jammu and Kashmir, we have done enormously well. As you know, the people who were displaced from POJK, they had not got any rights. They have been given all their rights. The people, refugees who had come from other parts of Pakistan and settled in Jammu region, they were not entitled to vote till now. They have been given those rights to vote. The domicile issues have been solved. The Kashmiri Pandits who had actually been displaced, they have been given domicile and they can easily come and join various places. But what is required is that you need industrial development. And industrial development does not come by government investment. It is the private sector which has to move in. And for that, probably, I think special economic zones need to be set up. And these zones need not be at the periphery. As of now, what has happened is all the industrial development has taken place at Jammu and south of Jammu. What we need actually is to move further north, move towards the Kashmir Valley. We need to set up special economic zone. We need to have road access to Kishtwar, Bhadarwa, etc. from Himachal Pradesh. The tourists must start visiting Kashmir, these parts of Jammu region from Himachal. Go from Himachal, come back from Himachal. So other than the normal established routes, we need to re-establish those routes from Himachal. There are huge tracts where pharma industry, etc. have scope. There are huge amount of biodiversity in these areas. This is actually a fertile land. A lot of agro-based industries are there. But you will be surprised that even in this age and time, you have a capital of Jammu and Kashmir which shifts every year twice from Jammu to Srinagar and Srinagar to Jammu. In 21st century, this sort of a mechanism is actually an anachronism. I think a time has come when we need to work out on a Canberra model or something like that. As you know, between Sydney and Melbourne, when there was a problem between capital, they established Canberra midway. I think Jammu and Kashmir's union territory today requires a new city, somewhere between Jammu and Srinagar, where a new capital can be established. Not only that, we also need to set up one or two more urban centers, one on Mughal Road, one maybe between Srinagar and Kargil, and one maybe on the train track between Katra and Kazigund. And these urban centers can also be used to resettle the Kashmiri Pandits who are displaced, because they are at this moment reluctant to go back to their areas because they feel the security situation is not good. So we could have planned cities where Kashmiri Pandits could be given initially a place to stay. And once they feel good and once they feel they are comfortable, they could relocate to their original venues where they were staying. So these are some of the things that I think we need to do. These urban centers may be planned cities where you can have a cantonment, you could have a colony for Kashmiri Pandits displaced, you could also have an ex-serviceman colony which was being worked, and then of course you can have industrial or business centers that can be set up. So these are what are required to my mind to do that. There is a huge hydropower potential which is now being tapped. I think we met the LG and LG said that many of the hydropower projects which were actually languishing have actually been expedited. But the fact is that all central government institutions which have been sanctioned for Jammu and Kashmir have either gone to Jammu city or to Srinagar. I think both these cities are bursting at the seams. I think a time has come where some of these institutions must go to these new cities that are being planned. And they should actually be organized there so that population moves along and the population centers emerge along these particular areas where we can have. So these are some of the viewpoints that I have as far as the future of Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, how we need to go about it. And as I said, people must start visiting it. I'm sorry, I have exceeded my time by about 5 minutes. I'll just apologize for that. With this, I think I'd like to stop and take on questions, comments, etc. If you have any, which if you have, I would like to take and answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a very good overview of the current situation and the challenges in the coming days that we have. Definitely, I can understand that being myself has worked on the topic of J&K for quite some time. So it's not so easy to put forth all the ideas in just 30 minutes. So there are a couple of questions, Alokji. Can we go ahead with them?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So one of them is mainly now that, like you said, the current LG, Mr. Manoj Sinha, being very kind of committed and proactive. So how do you see the control on the terrorist activities and the overall the security situation in J&K? So do you see that it's kind of coming into control and the steps are being taken for that?
This security situation has improved enormously. In fact, the terrorism, the number of terrorists eliminated have actually has been phenomenal. The cross-border terrorism has also reduced. And what is most significant is that in the past, before this cataclysmic changes had come, whenever security forces would go to apprehend a terrorist or to engage with them, the locals would come out with stone pelting and supporting. All those sorts of activities have actually been eliminated. So now the security forces have completely a free hand and they have dealt it. And my personal take, having visited Kashmir just 10-15 days back, is that the situation is so good that you'll be amazed that there are, at this point of time in Kashmir Valley, you will not find a hotel room. I went to Pahalgam, it looked as if there was a big fair going on at every park that you could go. The amount of tourists that are there are amazing. So it is absolute normalcy. But as I said, zero incident would never happen. One odd violence incident will continue to happen. And that's why I said, the government, the central government has taken the right step in this particular thing. They have started negotiated talks with the political parties. And then the next round, what we need to do is delimitation of the constituencies of the Jammu Kashmir Union territories, because there are constituencies for the territory which is under Pakistan's occupation that needs to be incorporated into Jammu and Kashmir, because there are seats reserved, 24 seats reserved in the assembly. Now those seats also needs to be delimited. Election should also be conducted for those seats. The refugees from those seats should be able to vote for them. The people who have migrated internationally should also have a provision whereby they could get postal ballots to vote for those areas. And these constituencies need not completely be across line of control. There could be also constituencies which crisscross the line of control, where part of the constituency is this side of the line of control, part of the constituency is that side, so that you can have elections at least in those areas which are this side. And then, of course, those refugees from other side could also vote, so that you have a greater sanctity of doing an election that you do. So that is what is actually required. As of now, normalcy has come back to a reasonable degree. Delimitation followed by election, and then maybe if the new assembly demands, then we could consider statehood and then beyond.
Definitely. So no, even people across the country can sense that, because few days back I was watching a video by Yana Mir. She is now of late very popular, and she gives a lot of the on-ground the reviews of on-ground situation and so on. So she was saying that now we are peaceful. The people here are leading a peaceful life, because those who were creating the trouble, they were all behind the bar now, right? So the many such people, the stone pelters and people like that, they were kind of neutralized, or they are already arrested and in jail. So that way we can also definitely see that the people, the normal people, they are kind of liking the current situation, and they feel that it is good that Article 370 is gone, right? So do you also agree with that, and what's your experience interacting with the normal people there?
See, you need to understand that one of the biggest advantages of this doing away with these provisions have been, as I said, social justice, gender justice, all that is there. But the biggest advantage which you could see on ground was that real devolution of power has taken place. The Panchayati Raj institutions which used to function in Jammu and Kashmir were dysfunctional because they hardly had any financial powers. They had no finances. So chairman of a panchayat or a district development committee chairman, they could do nothing, because there were certain families which had monopolized politics in Jammu and Kashmir, and they did not want a new crop of leadership to emerge, because these are the institutions through which new crop of leadership emerges. But now, after this particular developments, now you find, I met a panchayat committee chairman of Anantnag. He says that I had 50,000 was my financial power. Now I have 5 crores. That's some figure. you need to understand. So now they can do enormous work, and consequently a lot of work is getting done. And that's what I said, there are so many works being done, and that is where I feel that we all ought to go, because some temples are being renovated. Now if you don't go and visit those temples or those ancient places, the ancient institutions which are of great eminence, which are of Hindu culture, Hindu religion, faith, we will actually, they'll again fall into disuse. Now the renovation is taking place, but the onus lies on us, all of us, that we should make it in a point that we will go and visit these places once. And just don't go by the tour operators, just go to Srinagar, Pahalgam, Gulmarg. Go to every temple that is there. You go to Kokarna, go to other places which are actually, there are so many temples, so many shrines which have been in disuse. We need to actually go and start visiting. And I think on ground, if you go and see, you will see that life is actually absolutely normal, and economic activity is picking up. And there are a lot of developments. I think the way the work is now happening, because earlier the work won't happen. Now, I talked about the shifting of government. Now, this year, the government has insisted that no files will be shifted. Everything will be on e-filing.
Yes.
Though the personnel will still shift, unfortunately. So that has its own. But you need to understand how obscurantist the system is. Every official has two houses, one in Jammu, one in Srinagar. You have two offices, one in Jammu, one in Srinagar. Until recently, huge amount of trucks and vehicles used to be hired to shift all these files, and then for months you won't find the files. You know how the bureaucracy functions. And when you have an excuse like this, the bureaucracy can really play merry hell with the people. You just cannot get a work. So it was very bad. Now things are improving. But I am of the firm belief that Jammu and Kashmir needs a new capital, a new city where a new capital needs to be set up.
Yeah, definitely. So that brings me to another interesting topic. Like, you spoke about the few, maybe hundreds of families who are actually benefiting from the earlier Article 370 and so on. So now recently the Gupkar Alliance, right? So they formed Gupkar Alliance, and all these people said that, we are going to get the Article 370 back and so on. But then when the Prime Minister met them, of course, it was as usual. We understand that it was all about the bringing normalcy back and the delimitation and elections and so on. So how are they digesting it? Because of course we know that nobody wants to lose such a privilege that they had, right? So how do you see the political situation?
Please understand, as far as a common man is concerned, these Article 370 and other things had no impact. As far as the politicians are concerned, some of them are there because they are committed. They have taken stance and they would like to. But they also know that Article 370 is an article of Indian Constitution. They cannot do anything. It has to be done by Indian Parliament only. And they know that the overwhelming support for this sort of a resolution will never be there. So I think pragmatic politicians within Jammu and Kashmir have realized that this article is never going to come back. And if you talk to, you have Jammu and Kashmir Apni Party, even People's Conference and others, they know that this Article 370 is a lost cause. They are not actually going to do that. Their demand, of course, and to my mind, to some extent is legitimate, that they want a statehood, and which Prime Minister has promised them. I think they said that will be considered. There is no doubt about it. But for it to be considered, the proposal must be come from duly elected representatives. We should know who are, whether the people of the state want it or not want it. And that you can only know when the elections are there and that there is a representative assembly. And that elections, the prerequisite is delimitation, because as you know, the population growth has been disproportionate and the constituencies had been so gerrymandered that the assembly did not reflect the true aspirations and representation of the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
Definitely. So once let's say that once the delimitation is completed and the elections are conducted and all the constitutional process, whatever has to happen will happen. How do you see the future political scenario? In this sense, do you see a possibility of any single nationalist party? Because the challenge with the regional parties is that they have their own interest. It could be vested interest, or it could be the interest of their specific region or family and so on. So do you see that like it happens in any other part of the country, any single national party coming into power? How do you see that in future?
See, as of now, it's difficult to forecast because it depends on delimitation. But as has been the case in last few elections, you would see different political parties emerging victorious in Jammu region and Kashmir region. And eventually you would have to form coalition. But what is important is that you will find that the new political outfits have emerged in Kashmir Valley. I'm not talking about Jammu region, which is very, very important. And I think it is feasible to have a government which is nationalist in orientation. And I'm quite sure will happen. Even the other parties who are, as of now, part of the Gupkar alliance, a lot of them have already left it, as you know. Sajjad Lone's party has actually left the Gupkar alliance. Even Congress on Article 370, they know they cannot support it. So that's a very clear-cut stance is there. So I think as I study, I'm not going by the stated positions, with the sole exception of Mehbooba and her party. I think all other political parties have more or less reconciled to the fact that Article 370 is a gone case. It's not going to come.
Yeah. I think that's good to know. So another thing that you touched upon is also about the POJK. So where recently Pakistan also has conducted elections. So whereas technically they don't have any ground to do so because it's legally and constitutionally it is not part of Pakistan. So how do you analyze that situation? Of course, it's a political gimmick, and they want to they want to give a message saying that we are in full control of the region and so on. Though on ground, people are still opposing the Pakistan and all those things that you mentioned about. So how do you analyze the current situation? So what is the impact on this impact of this phenomena on the whole affairs?
See, firstly, we need to understand that as far as POJK is concerned, we are guilty of ignorance. Most of our population has never bothered to learn about what is POJK. We need to understand that right from the time 49 onwards, Pakistan has divided POJK into two different parts, political entities, without having any right to do so. It's kept Gilgit-Baltistan, which was called northern areas, and this particular area, which we call POJK, they call it so-called Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this is what is very important. You need to show, they show a facade that this is an independent entity. And they have been conducting elections right from that time. So the so-called fraud elections have been happening there, sometimes under basic democracy, sometimes under something. So elections have happened. But the so-called autonomy is so much that the president of AJK have been actually imprisoned from their office. From being president of the so-called POJK, they have been straight away taken to jails at many a times. And there is, of course, discontentment about this. The elections were rigged, as you know. And this sort of activities will come up. But as I said, from our point of view, it is very, very important that we are aware of what POJK is, who are the people of POJK, what are happening there, there have been so many demonstrations against Pakistan's control, Pakistan's training of terrorists in that particular area, the radicalization that Pakistan is trying to usher into these areas. But somehow there has not been adequate response to all these things within India. That is what is required. I think we Indians need to be worried about our fellow citizens, because all the people living in that area are constitutionally are Indian citizens. So we ought to know that. Pakistan will keep trying it because, as I said, Pakistan wants to project to the world that this is its part. It's trying to show that, whereas it has got no locus standi. Please understand, even the UN resolution is very categorical that Pakistan has been termed as the aggressor and he was to vacate all the territories under its occupation, which Pakistan has never done so to date. And then only there was a question of referendum, which the UN had talked of. Now that has not happened, unfortunately, after so much of time. So I think on all these issues, we are on the firm wicket, but we have not done adequately. as far as the people of this particular region is concerned and as far as the region is concerned. We have not even engaged with outfits from this particular region. Our embassies do not meet. Like Pakistani embassy, as you know, had been meeting Hurriyat leaders for a very, very long period. We have never tried to meet the leaders from Gilgit-Baltistan or from Mirpur Muzaffarabad who have been opposing the Pakistani occupation. We have never tried to meet them or make noises about these people. Some of them were imprisoned from time to time.
Definitely, definitely. So yeah, so the another question from the days ahead for J&K. So if you see the challenges, can you hear me well?
Yeah, I missed out the first part. Could you just?
No. I was saying about the days ahead for J&K. So if you see the occupied territory, so we have been discussing about the China's project on the road project that is going through the Gilgit-Baltistan and so on, and we also read that for CPEC there is a lot of opposition by the locals, because one is because of the demography of that area is changing, because of the Chinese presence, and there are also a lot of atrocities that we hear of, right? So how do you see that? Like, is that really causing a threat, or first of all, is that a practical project at all? Because people say that it has reached a stage where China is also thinking that financially it is not viable anymore. So what's your understanding on that? Or the
We need to understand that as far as CPEC is concerned, it's part of the BRI, and BRI is a huge project. It is the largest developmental project ever which has been undertaken in this globe. It's a global project. It's a huge project, mega projects. A project of this magnitude has never been taken place. Now, Chinese leadership has put everything that they have in this stake. Now, its success is very, very essential for Xi Jinping. Now, CPEC is a component of it. From our point of view, it's a very, very problematic thing because it passes through our territory. Pakistan feels that it is a panacea for all their problems because this is. Now, the point is, as far as Pakistan is concerned, China has given most of the money that's been given. The funding that has come for it has come up at a very, very high interest rate. And consequently, power plants that have been set as part of CPEC, etc., are producing the most costliest power in the world. So the Pakistan's ability to serve this debt is actually a question mark. So that is as far as Pakistan is concerned. And I think since sovereign guarantees have been given in so many places, like what happened with China in Sri Lanka, Chinese might take over some of these things. Already Gwadar, etc., they have started taking control of the issues, things in some of these parts. From China's point of view, the turbulence that has been going on, because people in Gilgit-Baltistan have been protesting, more significantly, people in Balochistan have been protesting. Baloch have been targeting Chinese and their projects and all those things. Even Sindhis and even Taliban have been targeting Chinese. The Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan have been targeting the Chinese. Now, please understand, Chinese investor is also very, very security conscious. The Chinese society is also become very, very safety conscious. So what is happening is that you have frequent attacks on Chinese citizens, etc., and Chinese projects are not moving. Some of them are mired. Though in fitness of things, you must say that it's not that totally come to standstill. There is some progress. Certain amount of traffic has moved through the things, but the security has been such a big issue that CPEC has not become commercially viable, and I don't visualize it becoming commercially viable as long as the population in Pakistan's hinterland, mainly the Baloch, are not reconciled to this particular project. So that is what is it. So as of now, it doesn't look, work is still going on. But economic viability is still a question mark, a big.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So one more thing about the coming to the displaced people, mainly the Hindus of Kashmir Valley. So now there is a lot of expectation that at least in rest of the country, that the people who lost their homes and had to leave their native villages and cities, so they have to be settled back. So you mentioned about the potential new capital where we can give settlements for them and so on. But I also understand that there were packages that were announced, and part of people in a small portion, they started going back. So how is that progress? Is people welcoming that, and are they feeling safe to go and settle there, and what's the situation?
See, as of now, most of the Kashmiri Pandits have not gone. Small minority has gone. They have been given government jobs, certain houses, etc. have been there. And by and large, they are safe and secure. There will always be an isolated incident. Please remember. And one incident will create that sort of a backlash that you can see. So we have to be very careful as far as that is concerned. And that's why I suggested, I'm not talking of new capital alone. I feel that Jammu and Kashmir needs at least 2-3 new urban centers. You need to set up new urban centers where you can set up their initial habitation. I'm not trying to say that they will stay, because their linkages are with their homes. So they eventually have to go back to their homes and their land, etc. A lot of them had sold out their property, etc. The government is also taking actions to do that. If you say that you are forced to sell, you are actually getting back your property. There is a provision for that also. And all those things are there. So those who are willing to go. But there is a big problem which has happened, is that the large number of Kashmiri Pandits have been away from their homes for a very, very long time. And what has happened is that in certain places, new generation has come up who have actually born and brought up here. And their livelihood is also in the new places. So there are a lot of families where I know where the old parents are very keen to go back, but the people who are working, their work is here and they are not very keen to go back. And they also don't want that their parents should go back, because then they would not be able to look after them. So there are, I knew a lot of families where parents were very keen to go back, but these people were not keen to. But as I said, it's a gradual process. And that's where I felt that if you create those new urban centers, 3-4 of them, then they can go stay there for some time, for a few years, and then see it for themselves, how safe or secure that place is, and then move to their old homes where they should have been.
Yeah. So one last question as an extension to this. Now you also mentioned about the integration with the rest of the country, in the sense people visiting the places and starting industries or education institutions, hospitals, and things like that. So recently we read that the Tirupati temple, has got land and they are constructing a temple there. That's really a welcome move, I would say. So now earlier the famous understanding or the notion is that nobody can buy land in J&K. It's very difficult to go and set up something there and so on. So now with this, the removal of the restrictions, so can an industrialist, for example, or can an educational institution or a hospital can go and buy land and set up their units there?
See, they can apply to the government, and they are providing them land for those who are setting up industry or setting up educational institutions or things like that. For this sort of institutional work, you will get land there. That's not a problem. In fact, even LG assured it. But I feel more important is that they need to set up SEZs where they should provide a land, so that such industries flock together. It's easier for them. There all the facilities can be taken place. Similarly, you can set up educational hubs, because as I said, climate is a very positive thing. Setting up a school in such climates is much more easy, and much more like people would want to put their children there if safety and security is assured. So that's what I'm trying to say. The more schools can be set up and things like that, educational hubs can be created. If not in Kashmir Valley as of now, even in Ladakh region, that's quite feasible. That's what I was trying to say.
Definitely, yeah. So with that, we are coming to the end of this program. So I'd like to thank Sri Alok ji for being with us today and enlightening us on the J&K affairs, and it is really good to see that a lot of good developments have happened, and we have a good feature in terms of integrating J&K with rest of Bharat. So on behalf of Disha Bharat, I thank you for being with us and sharing your valuable experience and insights, Alokji. And so to the audience, I request all the audience to be present tomorrow as well. So we will be having a talk by Professor Rakesh Sinha, who is a renowned author and also MP of Rajya Sabha. So he is going to address us tomorrow, and that's at 6 o'clock, and 11 to 12, 12 noon, 11 to 12 noon, we will be having the various programs by talented students. So please don't miss that as well. So with that, we conclude today's program. So thanks a lot for all those who have joined us, and please share this. It is available in Disha Bharat's timeline in Facebook. Please share this post so that many who missed today's talk can also get an opportunity to hear and get more understanding about J&K. So thanks a lot. Namaste.